Okay, I'm recording. We're going to talk today about how to get permaculture apples into Safeway. We have about 6 people from the Kickstarter that's going on right now. I kind of wonder when this podcast goes public in a few days, we might actually have 2 days left in the Kickstarter. But I guess the first thing is that the Kickstarter is almost to 100,000. It's at 94,000 right now, and it's been a wild ride. This Kickstarter is performing better than any Kickstarter we've ever had to date. It's been so exciting. And I think that the number of stretch goals right now is something like, what, 15 stretch goals, 16 stretch goals. But the people that are on the call now are the people that have supported the Kickstarter at the $65 level or higher. Hopefully you guys are happy with all the stuff. Is there enough stuff yet? Do we have to get more stuff? Should we get more stuff? You guys can unmute and say whatever it is you want to say.
I like what I got, but I'll always take more.
Okay. All right. Okay.
We're working on it. We're getting more.
Yeah. It seems like Mike and I are in talks with a whole bunch of different people to try and line up the next stretch goal. We have a mega author that we're talking to right now, and it's just that the conversation is just going really slow as the mega author is currently traveling. And it's like, wow, that would be amazing to get that book added in as a stretch goal.
How many people are still left to go up to $65 to get to that super goodie package?
There's like 1,200 people, 1,300 people that are below $65 that have backed the Kickstarter. So it's lovely that they've backed the Kickstarter. I just kind of feel like, I don't know, maybe are we not dangling enough candy in front of them? I kind of feel like the level of candy is pretty massive. I mean, the 15 or 16 things are big things, I think, but each person has their own tastes. I want to talk about the Kickstarter for hours and hours and hours. But today's podcast is supposed to be about how to get permaculture apples into Safeway. So this is one of those podcasts which I've gotten some feedback where quite a few people like this format. And it's something that I wrote a while ago. I recently learned that I never mashed this into a podcast. I've probably got like 30 more little articles that I wrote on a whim and never mashed them into a podcast. And like some people on Permies have changed their signature to link to this article to say, this is how I live my life, which I'm not even sure it's an article that's about how to live your life. But apparently this article has been something that people have found to be, I guess, profound, profound enough to make it into their signature for all of Permies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read bits, and then we all have a chance to talk about it. And the people that are in the call with me are welcome to either turn on their microphones and talk, or leave something into the chat and we'll work it in, and things like that. We do happen to have Alan Booker on the call for a little bit, and I am looking forward. Alan, have you already read this article?
It's been a long time. I think I read it several years ago, close to when it came out. So I have not had a chance to review it since then.
I suspect, and I feel like I know you pretty well, I suspect that you agree with this article, or you like it. That might be an easier thing to commit to. You like the article. True?
Yes, I think I'll have to go back through it, and as we go through it, I'll get to remember. And of course, I think it's important we're constantly learning. So I'll probably bring new insights to it now, hopefully, than when I read it a couple of years ago, because I'm constantly trying to, learn new things. So maybe I'll have new thoughts this time.
Okay. Let's get started. Yesterday, I was giving a tour to the PDC students, and we were talking about the apple trees growing here. Somebody asked about getting apples into the local grocery stores. I remember the moment, and I was pointing to an apple that was started from seed, and that particular tree at that time was probably 1.5 feet tall. Since then, that apple tree was destroyed by children. Some children came by and they were playing on the berms, and they fell down and landed on the tree and broke it off at the base because it was still young. It was still a little tiny tree. So that tree is gone. And that's the way it goes. And when you have thousands of trees growing from seed and some kids bump one off like that, you don't get as weepy as something where it's like, I paid $50 and I dug this giant hole. So it's like, we got plenty more trees where that came from. No worries. All right, so somebody asked about getting apples into the local grocery stores. I felt that this was a legit level 2 question. How to do business the way that other apple growers are doing business. How to compete with them and possibly outcompete them. How to do so profitably. Right? When I say level 2, is there anybody who doesn't understand what I'm saying? What I mean by that? I mean the wheat and eco scale. It's got levels 0 through 10. I'm sure I made a few podcasts about it, but is there anybody who doesn't understand? Like, do I need to make a quick explanation of that?
Just that it's sort of low on the scale. You might be, I think, recycling, and maybe you have a little bit of a garden, but you're not doing too much else, right?
The idea is that it's a reverse logarithmic base 10 scale, and I love saying that. Alan can check my math. But the key is that there's several billion people at level 0. There's 1 billion people at level 1, 100 million at level 2, 10 million at level 3, etc. And when you get to level 10, there's 1 person. And I have elected to put Sepultura there. And then basically each level gets closer to being more eco. And an example that I give is that at level 0, a person will spray dandelions. At level 2, a person will pull dandelions. At level 4, a person will eat dandelions. At level 6, a person will trade dandelion seeds with their friends to get the best dandelions, to grow the best dandelions. Kind of helps to show the different kinds of levels. I also kind of feel like most of the world believes, like most of your environmentalists and people that love eco stuff, believe that the scale ends at 3. Like the most eco people in the world are level 3, and there is no level 4. Then there's the 2 observations. The first observation being, and I have to say that I disagree with, like I agree with that the observation exists, but I disagree with the people that make these observations. So I observe that for wherever a person is on the eco scale, anybody that's lower than them, they have this passion about how those people are fucking everything up and need to be scolded or hit with sticks or shamed or something like that. And so I'm thinking that's not okay. The other observation is that people that are 1 level ahead are cool. People that are 2 levels ahead are super cool. People that are 3 levels ahead are crazy. People that are 4 levels ahead are so crazy they should be institutionalized for their own safety and the safety of those around them. So I also feel that that's errant. A lot of times we see people that we think are crazy, and later it turns out to be that they were just further ahead on your own scale. I believe I have many podcasts that go into a lot more details about that, but there's a quick summary of the wheat and eco scale. So I'm saying I felt this question about how to get apples into a local grocery store. is a legit level 2 question. I first felt myself get frustrated that the question is sort of loaded to be level 2, and I wish that the question was more level 5. I directed this guy to watch the Broken Limbs movie and pointed out how nearly everybody cannot get their apples on the shelf without the middleman. So I picked a student and called him the middleman. I then described how he works with 40 growers, scrapes the natural wax off, applies a petroleum wax, puts stickers on the fruit, and then sells the fruit to lots of grocery stores. Without all that, the grocery stores generally don't want to talk to you. We then talked about how a lot of times food shelf life is connected to how fungus and bacteria did not see that as food. But if you're going to go through the many phases of shipping, you cannot do it with fruit that has a short shelf life. And some of the tastiest and most nutritious food has a short shelf life. Now, at this point, I think I brought this up in a fairly recent podcast. The whole thing about long food shelf life and how other fungus and bacteria say that's not food, so they're not going to eat it, and that's why it has a long shelf life. I believe I recorded a podcast, like somewhere around podcast number 105 or so, with Sally Fallon Morell, who believed that the opposite was true. Food that is more alive is something that is going to have a longer shelf life. Alan, is this something you know anything about?
Yeah, it is. And it turns out to be kind of an interesting thing, that it's sort of an inverted bell curve, as far as I can tell. If a bit of, we'll call it food or a food artifact, has almost no nutritional value whatsoever, then okay, not much is going to come after it. On the other hand, if it gets into sort of the moderate range, now it is, everything wants it, including things very, very low on the trophic scale, which would include bacteria, fungi, molds, and lower insects. But as you begin to get the bricks level of fruit up, it has a combination of sugars and plant secondary metabolites in the leaf and also in the fruits. And these make it more difficult for the bacteria, the fungi, and the pest insects to be able to metabolize them. So there has been, like, for example, in Australia and parts of New Zealand, there have been grocery stores now that are actually specifying high bricks fruits and vegetables from suppliers, because, not because they're more nutrient dense, which they are, but because they have a longer shelf life. And so that's been shown. So it's sort of like, if you have no nutrient for anything to attack, like, let's say, white bleached bromated flour that sits on the shelf, there's just basically nothing there for anything microbial to attack, and it'll sit there for basically forever. On the other end, if you have a very nutrient dense, very high bricks plant, either the leafy parts or the fruiting parts, then that's going to eventually succumb, but it's going to have a longer shelf life than something that's in the middle that is just got enough goodies to be interesting to everything, but not enough in the way of sugars and secondary metabolites to hold them off for a while.
So I believe what you just said is yes, and the story is much richer than a simple Boolean thing.
Correct.
Yeah, that is magnificent, and I really enjoyed the part about how the bricks kind of plays into what Sally Fallon Morell was referring to.
Yeah, there's some unpublished research from some grad students that I'm familiar with that never got published, in which they looked at this whole question of bricks and nutrient density, because technically all that bricks really tells you is the amount, the percentage of dissolved solids in the sap of whatever you're doing. You can look at the sap of a leaf, or you can look at the juices of a fruit, and it tells you the bricks as a percentage of dissolved solids, most of which are typically going to be sugars. But there are other things. And one of the bits of research that they were doing was to figure out whether it was actually true that a higher bricks in a leaf or in a fruiting body was indicative of higher nutrient content. And it turns out, although they never got to publish this result, that what they were beginning to see was that when plants didn't have all of the nutrients they needed, that they got greedy and stored a lot of what nutrients they had immobilized and not in the sap, and that the bricks was low. But that they only went to a super high bricks, let's say above around 10 or 12 in the leaf, when they were in a state where they had enough nutrients that they could get their secondary metabolites moving. And then all of a sudden you saw the bricks in the leaf was able to go up. And this was indicatory of the fact that there were enough of the nutrients in the plant for them to be able to activate all their metabolic pathways. And therefore there was something of a correlation between high bricks and high nutrient density in the food, especially if you were measuring the bricks in the leafy body, not in the fruiting body.
I suspect that it's also going to be an indicator. And it's like, we talk so much about nutrition, but at the same time, I kind of want to work in a shout out for flavor. And I kind of feel like there's a whole world where it's like flavor is 20 times more important. And in fact, it's a much larger world, I believe, where flavor is 20 times more important than nutrients. And so these two things go hand in hand. Usually when you've got a higher bricks count, you're also going to get much stronger flavor, which sometimes could be a bad thing. Like, wow, that is some powerful spinach right there, buddy. That is some spinach that's going to kill people. But on the other hand, let's talk about a peach or a raspberry. Now you've got some powerful magic in your hands.
Yeah. Bricks equals flavor because low bricks equals wateriness. Basically, it's just water with almost no dissolved solids, including no dissolved sugars and no dissolved phytochemicals and so forth. And this also comes down to another question we'll probably hit later, which is that a lot of these super sweet things that we have continued to breed out, cultivars are super sweet with no other flavor, also tend to have sugars and no other phytochemical complexity, and therefore tend not to be as healthy for us as some of the wilder progenitors that have more complex flavors. Those flavors equal phytochemical density that our bodies can use as part of the immune system and as nutrient.
Okay. I'm going to move on with the article, unless anybody's got any other comments up to this point. All right. I pointed out how there was one guy in Broken Limbs, that movie called Broken Limbs, that would take his apples to a local organic grocery. They would sell it as is without the de-waxing, re-waxing, stickering, etc. And they tried to short the guy on price when he rolled up with a fresh load. And the guy said, fuck it, I'll just feed these to my pigs. And the store said, wait. And then it turns out they really can pay the agreed on price. People were asking specifically for his apples. I think a better question is, how do I make more money selling permaculture apples? There are then two very important paths to explore. One, making more money for one person that is growing permaculture apples, or two, how to feed the world permaculture apples and all of the apple growers get epic coin. All right, so this guy, he was getting more money per pound by just getting a bunch of boxes, putting them in his truck, and going over to this organic store. So he's probably already going into town to do a bunch of stuff, and it's kind of like, yeah, I'll go ahead and throw a bunch of boxes in the episode. Now, the great thing is that this guy was doing a permaculture thing in this movie, which is a magnificent movie, and it's available for free right now. We've got a link on Permies, and so I don't know, Mike, can you pull up that link that's a little further up? It says direct this guy watch. Yeah, so when you go to that, then you'll see that we've embedded the whole movie right into this thread at Permies. And it is, not only is it a great movie, but I believe it's an important movie that I think everybody needs to see. You need to understand the key messages in this movie. So to try to give a quick summary of the movie, it starts off with like, it's in central Washington, like where most of, I think like something like 40% of all the apples in the United States are grown in this one little region. And it talked about how so many of the apple growers are going bankrupt, including the guy making the movie. His dad was struggling. And so it's a movie that's kind of about his dad and kind of about all these other growers. And they are crazy struggling. Whereas before they were doing great. And it's kind of like, well, why are they struggling? And they go into it. And about halfway through the movie, you're kind of thinking like, yeah, these apple growers, they're just fucked. It's just over. There's nothing they can do. They're boned. This whole industry is collapsing. And so sucks to be them. The second half of the movie kind of starts off visiting different people who decided to like one of them was their orchard is about to get repoed by the bank, and they're just living life right on that edge. And it's like, come on, crop, be a bumper crop so we can get a little bit ahead. And a hailstorm came and obliterated their crop. And so they took all these hail damaged apples, they put them in these giant boxes, and they took them to Seattle. So like, I don't know, 4 hours away to go to Seattle. And they took them there, and they hit the farmer's market, and they sold them for cheap. But the thing is they sold them for cheap at the farmer's market, and they sold them all, but that price per pound that they were getting was still like 4 times higher than what they would have sold them for if the apples had been perfect to the middleman. And so it's like, so in the end, they were like, we made more money than if we sold it to the middleman that we usually sell to. So we had crop damage, and we had our best year ever. So it starts there, and then it goes up and up and up, and each person is coming up with a more creative idea. And then the person that's the ultimate is the permaculture farmer. And so this guy, he's got like a few apple trees, and they're giant apple trees. And basically whatever falls on the ground, his hogs eat it. And so he's got systems upon systems upon systems. And sure, it's like, oh, I'm heading into town today. Why don't I go snag a bunch of those apples and put them into boxes, and I'll drop them off, and they'll give me a couple $100 for the load. Oh, quick cash, easy peasy. He didn't spray the tree. He didn't prune the tree. He didn't do anything like that. He just snagged a bunch of apples, put them into boxes, and threw them in the truck, took them to town. That was it. He didn't do any other work. Whereas most of these other growers are like doing this enormous amount of work, including like 8 rounds of spraying every year. Okay. So back to the document. 2 ways. 1, making more money for one person that is growing permaculture apples. 2, how do you feed the world permaculture apples? And all of the apple growers are getting epic points. So for number 1, we can talk about polyculture apples being better flavor and nutrition. So kind of like what we were talking about earlier. And getting more dollars per pound. We can also talk about offering them for sale on your property rather than driving them somewhere. So less expense. We can talk about people coming to the property for other reasons and eating the apples. such as like bed and breakfast, Airbnb kind of stuff. We can talk about what SEP does and how people pay lots to come onto his property. And they think the food and water there is a bit like the Fountain of Youth. Much more to say in this. So of course, Sepp Holzer, he has apples and he has all kinds of fruit and vegetables and stuff like that. And he basically, rather than selling food, which is of course can be a very complicated legal space, he offers tours to people. And so it's something like 95 euros a head, which I don't know, is like maybe 120 bucks a head. And there's like 100 people a day. And he lets them onto his property and he shows them around. And then he says at the end of the tour, he's in the middle of his property and he says, okay, you guys show yourselves out. Bye-bye now. And they kind of cruise around, grab some food. That's it. And it's like, so, I mean, if there's 100 people, he just put $10,000 in his pocket for that one day, and they grab their own food. I don't know. That seems like a pretty great business model, and it's not exactly a direct thing. I mean, we're not talking about getting permaculture apples into Safeway so much. We're talking about how to get more money for permaculture apples. For number two, we can talk about how people keep selling their apples to the warehouses, which process the apples and resell them. We can talk about systems where we dramatically reduce the cost growing the apples. We can talk about how all of the other farmers do similar things and the systems in place get reformed. I can say more here, but I think this whole conversation takes a back seat to number three. It seems a bit silly that somebody will get in their car, drive 4 miles to a grocery store and buy apples that came from 400 miles away when there were perfectly ripe apples growing in their own yard or the yard next door. And then some people just don't feel like eating an apple. They want cereal for breakfast, pizza for lunch, and Mexican for dinner. They might go more than a year without eating an actual apple. Maybe see it as something that poor people or hippies eat. After all, an apple costs about $1. And a piece of apple pie costs $4. And an apple tart served at a fancy restaurant costs $12. So we can start to talk about hyper local permaculture, where people cut their driving to grocery stores and restaurants in half because within 2 or 3 blocks, maybe even right next door, there's food available at a little produce stand or a teeny tiny restaurant of sorts. Of course, the income from that would be small and the government would be pissy. But let's use Mr. Rogers' land of make-believe to forget about the government for a bit. I think a big slice of the permaculture dream is a reaction to a human need for safety. Okay, I'm going to get into this here in just a second. But do we have any comments about this thing about number one, number two, and number three? So it's like, number one, you're trying to get more money. You're just going to sell those apples and you're going to try and get more money. Number two is to continue to be part of the system. And number three is to explore ideas about hyper-localism.
Hi, it's Diane. I'm going to chime in on this. I think with the pandemic and the shortages, a lot of people sort of opened their eyes to see how our extended supply chain doesn't necessarily work that well. So I think it is a good time for, local, I know the CSAs around here all sold out. Farmers markets, when they were allowed to open, there was just a deluge of people. So I do think that somehow that awareness might be hitting folks who never would have had it otherwise.
Okay. Alan.
Yeah, and Diane, thanks for that. I was about to say, the thing that I'd like to point out here, just kind of backing up, would be that what Paul is doing here in this article is an excellent illustration of permaculture thinking, in that there's a human reaction. Somebody asked you, how do we get these apples into Safeway? The reaction for most people would be to attack that question instead of backing up and asking, is that the right question in the first place? In other words, it's easy to get stuck in this blinder of the fact that most of us have grown up in a culture in which that's the assumption, that food comes from the grocery store. That is the way reality is, instead of backing up and asking, is that the way that we should design the system? And so by backing up and basically asking questions about the underlying assumptions about how food is gotten, that this has allowed for a much deeper and broader analysis of the whole question, other than just how do we take and get some, quote, permaculture grower to be able to attack this system that's designed very poorly to be able to get, it's not designed to get healthy food to people efficiently, and to ask a whole different set of questions about how do we provide people with what they need in a way that makes sense without being stuck in that narrow viewpoint.
I want to first back away from the word should. So you threw down the word should. I want to back away from that a little bit, and then you also said something about attack the question, and I kind of feel like I like the idea of answering the question, and rather than either the attack or the should, I instead want to say, I want to add to the conversation. I wish to paint a picture. Please allow me the opportunity to paint a picture of something richer and more. I do think that if a permie wants to play the commodity apple market, that they could do that and have a huge advantage. So like they do everything that the other apple growers do in order to take mountains, like semi-truckloads of apples to the middleman and possibly get 12 cents a pound for that. But at least they have eliminated a bunch of their expenses along the way, so that their margin is much fatter. But I kind of feel like anybody who's contemplating going down that road, I wish to go down the path exactly what you're suggesting, Alan, and have a conversation with them. Hey, can I just a thought? You know, can we talk about something that might pay even better, or even more than that? And I think, you know, where we're about to go here in a moment is like, can we explore a path where you end up richer, but there's no money even changing hands? But a lot of times, Alan, I want to ask you this question, and it's very much related to what we're talking about. When people first hear the word permaculture, their very first thought, their very first impression, their very first whatever about it, as they start to embrace it, like the first week, it's all about like, can I make more money with permaculture? Because if I can't, I don't want to touch it. But can I? And then I kind of feel like as we get further down so the first answer is yes, you definitely can make more money with permaculture techniques. Then as you get further down, then it's like I like to think that people learn that it's like you can eliminate a massive amount of your own personal expenses. You can find a higher quality of life. There's so much more that you could do, that next thing you know, the pursuit of money kind of fades away. Is this your observation? This is my observation. Is it also your observation?
I've seen people come into permaculture through different doors. One of them is definitely on the idea of can it make me money? Another one is certain number of people I've seen come in the door thinking the systems that we've set up today are incredibly long supply chains and incredibly brittle, and therefore they feel insecure and they're looking for more security. And then there's a whole nother group that comes in the door that I've seen that come in basically saying, I have chronic degenerative disease problems, or my children do, and this whole system of food, the more I'm researching it, the more I'm realizing that it's probably at the root of this, and I'm looking for an alternative. I'm looking for an answer to that. So I've seen all of those, So I see a mix of all of those things for people coming in the door and asking me about, permaculture.
This makes me want to ask you another question. It's another one where I want to hear your opinion, and I'm going to start by assuming that you have a Whole Foods in your region.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, would you say that a permie could grow food that is like, you brought up the fact that there are people with ailments. Do you believe that there could be a permaculture site in the United States that's growing a bunch of food, and I'm going to make up a number, maybe I'm going to make up a number, and we'll see if your number is different than mine. 80% of the population suffering from some form of ailment could go to that site and their ailment would go away. And all of these people, 100% of these people, are currently getting all of their food, all of it, from Whole Foods. They're being very careful to get only the most nutritious food that they can get at Whole Foods. And then in fact, I'm going to twist my question even further. 100 people get 100% of their food from Whole Foods. And I want to take those 100 people, and they all suffer from some sort of ailment, and I don't know what it is. But I take all 100 people to this fictitious permaculture place, polycultures, hugelkultures, bricks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to say for 80 of those people, their ailment goes away. Do you agree with the number 80, or do you have a different number?
I guess the way I would characterize it is this. For me, I'm an engineer, and just guessing at numbers is hard for me. What I would say is this. My experience is that, I have to, there's a Whole Foods here. I have to go there occasionally because where I am in Alabama, there's certain kinds of things I can't source non-chemically anywhere else. Mm-hmm. And some of the things like that I'm not able to, just don't have the time to grow myself. But here's what I would say. What I'm finding at Whole Foods is generally what I would characterize as industrial organic. Right. And industrial organic would be things that are officially labeled USDA organic. And when I see that label, to me, it is more of an indicator of what is not in the food than what is in the food. True. That to me, industrial organic says, okay, this is not a GMO. This does not have certain types of toxic GIC on it. The GIC that they're allowed to use is a little bit less toxic, but they are still allowed to use certain forms of organic GIC that the industry has managed to bamboozle the USDA into letting them use. So if I have the choice between non-organic and organic, okay, I'll choose the organic because I get less toxic GIC. But the way that a lot of these crops are being grown in these industrial organic systems does not dramatically improve the nutrient density of the food. So if you're talking about a permaculture site where there is care being given to biological cultivation of food crops to create nutrient-dense food, then I would say it is my experience that anyone who has a chronic degenerative disease, 100% of them will see at the least an improvement in their condition. A considerable number, probably a vast majority, will see a significant improvement, and a very good subset may see a complete subsidence of that merely by getting the nutrients that they need into their diet. Of course, it would be helpful to maybe make a few other changes, like getting other toxic gick out of the way, and getting some fresh air instead of sitting behind a computer all the time, and some other things like that. But just the one dimension of going to nutrient-dense food, in my experience from dealing with people who have chronic degenerative diseases and having discussions with them about their food and how to get their food, I would say that the more nutrient dense that you can get the food, the more likely that your body is to be able to correct the imbalances that cause many of the chronic degenerative diseases. And that I would suspect that 100% of the people who were able to get that food would see improved quality of life. And it would vary from person to person as to how much of that, whether it was a 50% recovery or 100% recovery or a 30% recovery, it would be vary from individual to individual, because some of those chronic degenerative diseases do have other root causes.
True. What I feel like what I heard from you was 60. But one of the things you said is that it's difficult to put a number on something as an engineer. I am also an engineer. I kind of feel like putting magic numbers on things is part of the ways in order to be able to move forward, because you need to come up with a design to perform your testing on. And of course, you want to try and get it right if you can the first time, but of course, then later test and then later optimize. I feel like I'm very comfortable with effectively what is oftentimes referred to as pulling numbers out of your ass. I will do this a lot myself, because it's kind of like, okay, here's what I believe, here's what I am feeling, thinking, whatever. And then of course you qualify the statement by saying, this is not a proven fact. This is my own personal speculation based on the knowledge set that I have at this time. And so I'm therefore, I don't know, because I qualify the number as such, I can use these numbers. And then when getting together with several other people, each person could put out different numbers based on their knowledge set. And then we can get an idea of like, wow, if my number is radically different than yours, maybe I'm missing something in my knowledge set, or maybe you are. Now,
you're trying to make an informed estimate.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate that. I'm just very, I'm hesitant to try to put exact numbers on an informed estimate, just because somebody's going to come back along behind me and quote me on it as if it were a claim.
Sure. Out of context.
So, yeah, out of context. So I try not to do that, but I appreciate your willingness to do so.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna. Anybody have any other comments about everything to this point? Nope. Okay, so here we go. When you spend any time understanding the world's problems, you get that horrible feeling of, that could happen to me, followed immediately by, how do I add safety to my life so that won't happen to me? The first piece is, if I had $1 million, I could make safety for me. In time, I think most people start to come to the conclusion that that is a poor type of safety. You would need to buy just the right things, and without knowledge, you could buy the wrong things or not install the right things correctly. Then, as you start to learn all the things to make the $1 million be safe, I think, and I'm sure a few billion people will have different thoughts, all roads lead to permaculture and homesteading. So, as we're exploring food systems, especially Apple's and Safeway, mean, part of it is it's like a lot of this, we're kind of talking about, like, I'm going to grow apples and I'm going to sell them for money. And now I have money and now I can buy my safety. At the same time, if you're not growing apples, then you're buying apples. And then it's like the price of those apples could go way up if your only source for apples is the grocery store. And then we kind of introduced the idea of maybe somebody in your neighborhood has an apple tree and you can get some apples from them. All right. If a person has a head full of homesteading and permaculture, a solid home, their energy needs are itty bitty, and they're growing 4 times more feed than they could ever eat, and they have $4,000 in the bank and $10,000 hidden under the mattress, maybe that person now has more safety than the earlier person with $1 million in hand. All right. Anybody got any comments about this part so far? We're kind of trading money for knowledge. The stuff in your head would buy safety. Not only that, but the concept of a humble home, big garden, and a little bit of coin in the bank is better than having $1 million. All right.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. You're basically talking about different forms of capital, right? You're talking about things like non-monetary forms of capital, including real estate, genetic capital, real capital, and so forth. And the reason that, historically in society you've been told to go for the money is because that the idea is that money is fungible, that you can exchange money at any point in time for anything you want. And therefore, money is one of the most, the idea goes, money is one of the most high leverage forms of capital. If you want an apple today, you can go buy it. If you want, a guitar tomorrow, you can go buy it, provided you have money. But, and that of course is always assuming that the monetary system is stable and that the markets are available and so forth. And that high value food is even purchasable, which in many areas, I think that's a dubious question. Can you actually buy high nutrient density food in many areas, no matter how much money you have? And my experience is that's a very iffy question.
Yeah, debatable at best.
Yes.
So I think another thing that kind of comes up is that there are elections that happen. There's politics that are perpetually going on all over the world. And I do feel like if you live in a city and your only source of food is the grocery store, then who you vote for is going to make a big difference. Because if you vote for the wrong person and they somehow make a poor choice, then suddenly you might not have food at the grocery store anymore, or the price of the food at the grocery store is now, in the span of a year, is now 10 times higher than it used to be. And so it's like, oh, this is not good. Suddenly food is so insanely expensive. Whereas I kind of feel like if you've got your humble home and your giant garden, and you've got a little money under the mattress or whatever, then it kind of seems like all of that political stuff becomes really small and far away and doesn't matter as much. And so then you kind of tend to tune it out. It's kind of like who you vote for doesn't matter as much as it used to. And you find other things to entertain your days, I suppose, other things that you value more. Same thing goes back to the whole thing of like the pursuit of the dollar when we started with this. How to get permaculture apples into Safeway. And it's kind of like, all right, you did all this work and you got these giant boxes and you put all the apples in these giant boxes and you took it to the middleman and he paid you 17 cents a pound for your apples. And then it's like, all right, well, you could take them directly to the store over there, and then they'll pay you 80 cents a pound. And it's like, yay, you made more money. All right. But it's not Safeway anymore. So it's like, but you're all focused on the dollar at this point. How much money can I get for my apples? How much money can I get for my efforts? And then I guess the thing that I'm trying to do is I'm trying to explore this alternative path, which is what I would really like to talk about. So when the question started off with how to get more permaculture apples into Safeway, this thing, this direction we're going is what I feel like is a good, I don't know, I'm going to say it's a good level 7 kind of thing. Now, due to a previous article I wrote, I typically refer to this now as the state of GERT, or we keep calling it GERTitude. And I feel like in a lot of my podcasts in the last, I don't know, 4 years or so, this expansion of vocabulary, GERTitude, because it's a big story. There's a link to the story. And the idea is that GERT has these things. GERT has a humble home, a massive garden, and she sells some of her excess produce to people. But nearly 100% of her diet is coming right out of her own garden. And the money just kind of shows up. She doesn't really have to go anywhere to sell it. People come to her, and so she makes some money every year, and it's very low effort. And so as part of the picture in the story of GERT, that I basically propose the idea of, if I give GERT $1 million and GERT doesn't change a damn thing in her life, everything, her entire life stays exactly the same, she doesn't do anything differently, is it fair to call GERT a permaculture millionaire? That's kind of like the core of that article, the article about GERT. And so therefore we started this talking about selling apples to Safeway with the function of earning money. And now I'm proposing this radically different picture of GERT. And I'm not saying that the whole GERTitude thing is for everybody, but I suspect that a lot of permies are very interested in it. I don't know if for the people that are in on this call, so we now have like, I don't know, 12 people on this call. If you could hit the raise your hand button to show, and I believe that what you do is there's a reactions thing at the bottom, and when you click on that, you can show raise your hand. For people that are interested, like the whole concept of GERT has some appeal to them, and you're finding value in what I'm saying here about pursuing GERT instead of pursuing selling your apples to Safeway. I mean, so there's, okay, so here come the hands. There's a couple so far. 3. All right, Alan, you got your microphone on.
Yeah, I was about to say that, as you were talking about the whole thing with politics and so forth, it reminded me of a very famous quote from Mollison, Mr. Mollison, that probably a lot of people have heard, but I'll just bring it back up here because I think it bears on the conversation. He said, the greatest change we need to make is from consumption to production, even if on a small scale in our own gardens. If only 10% of us do this, there is enough for everyone. Hence the futility of revolutionaries who have no gardens, who depend on the very system that they attack, and who produce words and bullets, not food and shelter.
I think that's, I especially like the part about revolutionaries who have no gardens. It's like, I kind of feel like, where's your garden? And I don't have one. It's like, I have a hard time kind of going along with what you're saying there, buddy. Okay. Let's see. I talked about the permaculture millionaire. All right. Now let's get into. Well, first of all, I'm about to move on to the thing where it says a few ways that a permie can make money with apples. Does anybody have any comments on everything up to this point? Nothing. Okay. Oh, somebody wrote. Diane wrote, "We're trying to achieve gratitude for retirement. Most people in their 50s and 60s don't have pensions and will be in tough shape as their employment ends." I think gratitude is an ultimate retirement state. And so now everybody in on this call has backed the Kickstarter for $65 or higher. And the Kickstarter is for the SKIP book, Skills to Inherit Property. And I kind of feel like part of what we're trying to say in SKIP is like, let's suppose that you're 18 years old and you're thinking to yourself like, okay, I'm going to go through all these steps. And in the end, I'm going to retire. And when I retire, it's going to be like gratitude. And it's kind of like, don't we have a system? I mean, I think that the SKIP book, part of the idea is giving those 18-year-old people the ability to skip directly to the finish line, skip directly to a potential gratitude kind of package. That's what I think that we've written. But, I mean, I suppose we should have recorded a podcast to be like, all right, do you guys think we're full of shit or what? I think that we're already, in fact, the funny thing is that by doing this Kickstarter, we are getting a lot more people that are writing to us and saying that they have property and they're looking for somebody worthy that to will their land to. All right. A few ways that a permie can make money with apples. 1, sell to the commodity apple sellers. Your expenses will be less because you don't spray, but you should expect to get paid about 10 cents a pound, and you might have to drive your apples a few hours to the warehouse. You have to grow very specific varieties. Maybe you can start your trees from Antonovka seed and graft the supermarket varieties to that, at least to get the taproot that way. You could attempt to convince the commodity people to carry permaculture stuff for a premium price, but I think you'll be told that the market isn't ready for that. In other words, they don't really understand what you're talking about, and the consumers that buy apples generally don't take that much time in making apple buying choices. And the grocery store buyers don't either. You could spend a few $1 million in advertising to market to the general public about the advantage of permaculture apple, and then you might get 50 cents a pound for apples that are sold for $4 a pound in stores. Number 2, do like the couple did in the Broken Limbs movie. Take the apples to a Saturday market or farmer's market. They drove about 3 hours and sold their apples for a fraction of the price of the other sellers and sold out quickly. The story was that they were going to sell via the number 1 process, and even then it looked like they were going to lose their farm to the bank. Then hail destroyed 90% of the crop. They took the remaining beat up apples to Seattle and sold them almost instantly and had more money than if they had no hail and did the number 1 thing. Number 3, just like number 2, but tell your customers about the value of permaculture and polyculture. Become the go-to source at the market. As you sell out faster, gradually raise your prices. After all, do these apples cure cancer and save the bees? Is the flavor better? If the apple tree is grown with raspberries, can people taste the raspberries in the apple? Number 4, the people from the Broken Limbs movie in number 2 moved on to make an Apple of the Month business. A box is shipped out once a month to people featuring their apple varieties. They made so much money this way that they paid off their mortgage and bought more land. Number 5, improvement ideas on number 4. Each apple has a story. What is it good for? Eating fresh, baking, sauce, cider, storage. What is the tree growing next to? Can you taste that? And instructions on how to grow apple trees from seed for this month. A little more information on what would be good polyculture guild plants and why. A permaculture apple gift box might contain a dozen rather perfect apples. Maybe a person is getting $7 per pound and infecting brains with permaculture. Even just one box would be an excellent gift from a permie or to a permie. And a year-long subscription would be an even better gift. Even more, a permie could be desiring seeds and could get these very seeds packed in apples. Number 6. Another fellow in the Broken Limbs movie has a few trees and takes boxes of apples to the local organic co-op. It sounds like he pops into his town once in a while already, so it isn't really an extra drive, just a dozen boxes or so. He got a little over $1 a pound, so the store is probably selling them for $2 or more a pound. Number 7. The guy from number 6 could set up a little honor system food stand in front of his house. Maybe he could get $2 per pound, and he could have a bunch of other stuff sitting out there, veggies, other fruits, crafts, eggs. Number 8, expanding on number 7, provide additional information about the foods with an emphasis on permaculture and polyculture. Point out the stuff about how grocery store food is about the long shelf life, so it has hardly any flavor or nutrition. Point out to vegans how many animals are killed in the harvesting of organic monocrops by big machinery, and how this food is all hand harvested. Do the thing where people are encouraged to start their own apple trees and other things from seeds within the fruit sold, and what might be a good polyculture for each. Build demand, which leads to raising prices. Number 9. By the way, if anybody wants to talk about these, go ahead and do that raised hand thing, and I'll pause and give you a chance to say your thing. Number 9. Sepp Holzer has talked for so many years about the value of permaculture food that many people in his area swear that it has cured their illness or made them younger. Sepp charges 95 euros per person to come onto his land, and he gets 100 people a day. He gives them a quick tour and asks them to show themselves out. They fill their bags as they exit. Each person can only take as much food and seed as they can carry in one load. Number 10. A permaculture consultant called me one day and told me he was on the road driving to see a client. He was really proud of his new design for the client. The land was nearly useless. It had been abused to the point that it was a big gob of flat, broken clay where nothing was growing. He managed to turn it into a weed patch, so the soil was being improved. His design is to grow alfalfa. I was pissed. Of course, this is sort of my thing, I guess. I want everybody to do things my way, which is nearly always different than what they have in mind. Alfalfa would be baled and carried away 3 times a year, thus depleting the soil again. I asked about this situation. 200 acres of pretty useless spent desert. One huge house with the owner. I mean, it was something like, I don't know, 10 or 12 bedrooms or something really enormous. Apparently, the owner is some sort of guru, and people come from all over the world to visit him. My Designing over the phone. Do 2 acres of hugelkultur surrounded by huge berms to reduce the desiccating wind. Start thinking about some smaller water features. Each year, add another acre. Grow a magnificent permaculture garden. Rent the rooms to the visitors. A cook harvests food and feeds the guests. The income is the rooms. Tell the visitors about the food, the value of permaculture, and the guru's commitment to permaculture. As demand rises, raise the prices of the rooms. I think the real number 10 is set up a permaculture sanctuary of sorts. People pay to visit. The apples are part of the big picture, maybe served as pie or a snack. Number 11, the state of GERT. Maybe your neighbors give you $50 once in a while and they pick a bunch of apples. Sometimes for a lot of fresh eating and pies. Sometimes for candy. Sometimes GERT picks the apples and sells a dozen boxes for $20 a box. And the neighbors' friends come pick up the boxes. Maybe another neighbor pays a few $100s to run their pigs through once in a while and eat the dropped apples, or pays in pork. Maybe another person has a little honor system stand like number 8, and GERT gets $8 per box that the other person picks, and $25 per box that GERT takes to the stand herself. Number 12. GERT is part of a small, closed permaculture community. There's some of the number 11 stuff, but there are also some visitors that come through. GERT sells her apples to some of the hosts that cook some meals, and GERT puts together boxes like number 5 for the guests. And she sends out boxes sometimes, but just for a few people that stayed there. All right, there you go. 12 things for getting more money for your apples. And I do think that they're kind of in a kind of order there. Number 1, pretty close to the commodity market kind of stuff. But I do think that for a while there, we were getting more and more money for those apples. We were getting a lot more money per pound, you know, which kind of equates to dollars per hour in a way. And then we started transitioning to something where it's kind of like, you know, your need for dollars is reduced. Your dollar goes 10 times farther. So if your dollar goes 10 times farther, you need 1/10 the dollars. So if your dollar goes 10 times farther and you're getting a really great price for your apples, but you're just not doing a lot of work, it seems like you're actually coming out even more dollars ahead. I mean, at some point in time, are you getting $10 or $20 per pound of apples? And then on top of that, you know, you don't even need very much money. Your need for money is like, you know, if you gave GERT $1 million, her life would not change. Anybody got anything they want to add to this point? Any comments on any of the stuff I just read out of this article?
Well, one of the things that hits me here is you mentioned something I think is important, which is the apples have a story. You know, we talked about me going through Whole Foods, and you know, I can see that they have about 6 varieties of apples. That's about it. And if I name those particular varieties, probably most people listening would be able to identify which ones, you know, what they were. And I think part of that is that, you know, you go in and you look at it and say, well, here's a Granny Smith, and here's a Gala, and here's a Fuji, and so forth. And there is, of course, nothing there but the story of those apples. Which ones are good for baking? Which ones are good for out-of-hand eating? Which ones make good cider? You know, it's not included there. And you just have this very narrow band of a few varieties. And I guess you're supposed to just have kind of like somehow picked up which ones make the best out-of-hand eating versus which ones make good cider, if that's what you're going to do, and so forth. versus like if you are looking at the literally hundreds of potential local varietals in a landscape that used to be grown, then they all have stories, and they have a connection to place, and they have and part of the knowledge of the place was knowing which of those local varieties were good for what. And I also noticed that a lot of them, were not ones that were cultivated by industry to have nothing but sweetness. And all of the apples you can buy in a grocery store to me today are just very bland tasting. They have sweet as about their only flavor note in most of them, versus a lot of the richness of a lot of local varietals that grow around here that still have all the flavors of their phytochemical richness involved. A much richer experience, and to me, probably a much more healthy experience to be eating those apples that still have some of their phytochemical richness to them. But also, to me, it's more nourishing to be eating an apple that has a story and a connection to place.
I'm going to speculate a moment. I'm not sure how true this is, but I believe that nearly all of the apples that you can buy at the grocery store are going to be a keeper style. So there's, in the world of apples, there's like a dozen different kinds of attributes that you would get for apples. So for example, one attribute out of a dozen would be this particular variety produces a very large apple versus something closer to a crab apple or a medium-sized apple. It's like, oh, it's a nice big apple. What a big apple. That's one thing. Another one is that going to be the whole concept of what's referred to as the winter keeper apple. So a tree will put out apples that tend to be really quite hard, but the thing is that they will last for like 5 months after they've been harvested. And I would imagine that this is the kind of thing, this is the kind of apple that is going to do particularly well in a grocery store on the shelf. And so I'm just speculating that, I mean, like, okay, the most popular apple is the Macintosh. Is the Macintosh apple, is that a winter keeper? I think it probably is.
Yeah, from what I've been able to see in working with this, pretty much every apple that you're going to see in a major chain is selected as a varietal because it can store relatively well, that it bruises not very easily. In other words, it can handle transport, that it grows to a fairly uniform size, and that it is fairly sweet. That is to match the demand of flavor demands from consumers. And that varietals that don't meet all those requirements are much less likely to make it into any of the major chain grocery stores.
I know that when I was a child, my granddad had a single apple tree, and the variety was yellow transparent. And it's one of the first apples available every year. It has a unique flavor. But the thing is that it'll pump out a whole bunch of apples all at once, and you better eat them now. It does not keep. You will, the apples are too green. Suddenly they're ripe. And then you go in there and you stuff yourself eating apples, and 3 days later, they're all rotten. And it's kind of like there's this window of time to go and eat those apples. So I'm going to say I don't recall ever seeing yellow transparent apples offered for sale anywhere. But it is a very popular home apple tree because it's the first tree of the season. But and I think I've done a lot with yellow transparent, and there's lots and lots you can do with it, but you got to do it all quickly.
Yeah,
Do you have experience with it?
brings back a memory, Paul, of me visiting my grandmother in West Virginia when I was young. She had 2 apple trees, and of course they were a local varietal, but they did put out green apples that did go off pretty quickly. But they set in a huge harvest all at one time, and she would gather them all up. Then she would get this huge copper cauldron and make quart after quart of apple butter, and make enough for the entire year. And that was how they saved those apples for the year. And that was when I went every time, was one of the big things, was all that homemade apple butter that she would do on her homemade biscuits every morning. And this is how people used to interact with that particular problem. You know, it was like you had a bounty, and how do you do something with it? Instead of expecting that apples will be available on the shelf at the store year round.
All right, I'm going to move on with the article. Many years ago, I had a presentation I created, and I presented it several times to large audiences, how to make the big bucks with permaculture. And I think one of the times I presented it, I recorded it in a podcast. So I think like podcast number 9 is my presenting it, which must have been like 10 years ago or more. I think, oh, there it is. I think one time it was recorded and it's still available as a podcast. Okay. I think all of those things still stand. All of the things from those presentations will bring in a lot more money than if the person traveled a more conventional approach. And they are a lot of work. When people first contemplate permaculture, it seems that their income thoughts lead towards working at a farmer's market or running a CSA. Eventually, these tend to just not pay enough. And these folks tend to let permaculture go. Okay, I gotta say, I have probably heard from 20 people who listened to my podcast and heard me talk about how most people doing a farmer's market or running a CSA end up earning less than minimum wage. It's a lot of work, and the payback just usually doesn't pay out, and there's better ways. And so I've heard from dozens of people who've said they heard me say that and they thought I was full of shit. So they went ahead and did it. And then after a year, and that's when they contact me to say, okay, I give up. You're right. But hey, keep on going out there. I'm full of shit. Go do that. So, Alan, how many people have you talked to who have decided to do the farmer's market or running a CSA? And how did that work out for them?
The only place I've seen farmers markets really work for people is when they have a specific niche product that has a high market demand. Like there's a gentleman here who is doing soy-free eggs, for example, which there's a very high demand for in this area because there's a lot of soy sensitivity. Okay. He shows up at the farmer's market as a distribution point. He opens at 8 o'clock and he's sold over 100 dozen eggs by 8:30 and packs up and goes home. But that is the exception because he's got a very specific niche, high value product. The only other one I know that's successful at doing that is one of the very few places here that grows in a truly past organic way. They have developed relationships with customers, and they also show up with orders that have been given by email, and people show up and pay their money and pick up their bags and go. So it's not quite a CSA, but so they're using the farmers market as more of a distribution point than anything else.
Is there anybody else who is participating today that has any feedback about the fabulous wealth one gets from selling produce at a farmer's market or running a CSA? Anybody? It doesn't be personal experience. Maybe you've heard of some people or anything like that. Anybody else that could confirm or deny the stuff that we're attempting to say? Nope, apparently not. Okay. All right, moving along. Others are determined to feed the world with permaculture. They take a vow of poverty, work incredibly long hours, sell the food for cheap. And speaking of Safeway, a lot of times they're trying to sell the food for less than what Safeway charges. So sell the food for cheap and discover hundreds of barriers, making it difficult to feed the masses. Barriers that are usually solved with money and or red tape. One of the things I've heard from permaculture circles over and over again is feed yourself first. To me, it sounds a bit like the GERT thing. Once you have your permaculture systems that provides 90% of your food, and you have a home, even a tiny, humble home, and you have no debt and very low monthly expenses, maybe a little bit in savings, then it's a lot easier to do a little to feed the world or be part of a CSA or a farmer's market. But then I think you're kind of like doing the CSA, the farmer's market thing, as like, because it's cool. You like doing it. You like going there and being part of that. You know, it's like part of who you are. It's just an enjoyable experience. You're doing it for the sake of the fun, not because you're going to get your survival money. This kind of talk often leads to talk about how did Gert get her land? Or how did Gert get the money to get the land? Or how did Gert get the money to create her patch of permaculture? It always strikes me that the Gerts of the world just go about being passionate about permaculture and an opportunity presents itself. I have met hundreds of people where they followed their passion and in the end it all worked out. We can call it magic, and each person stumbled onto a different magic. And then there are angry people where they cannot bother to learn permaculture or plant a seed or build any experience, and they seem to think that somebody will do it all for them. Those people tend to not stumble into magic. I think this is an excellent conversation for another time. Okay, I want to say that when it comes to this magic, another way of expressing this magic might be to call it the SKIP program.
Exactly.
So,
That's what I was
yeah,
gonna say, magic sounds like Skip.
I do feel like a lot of people stumble into an opportunity. They go out, they work hard, they're keen on permaculture, and then magic happens and they've got a plot with a home and things like that. I think in a way, SKIP is about formalizing this process. Now, I saw a post in the chat, and here's what I'm going to do. For everybody that's involved in this call, see if you can find the put the hands up button and put the hands up if you believe you might be a person that is going to be that could someday be looking for somebody worthy to will your land to. So like you have land with a home, and there might even be some money in the bank, and you're thinking to yourself, someday I'll be looking for somebody to will my land to. All right, so right now there are 3 hands up. So the key is that now, of course, we had some people who posted out to Permies and they said, oh, I would will my land to somebody. And I'm looking for somebody worthy to will my land to. And they just got deluged with people saying, I'm worthy, give it to me. and it was, so of course that person's like, can I delete this? Can I hide this? I'm getting way too much attention from people who say they're worthy, which is not the same as knowing that they're worthy. And I think that there's this is a big problem is that that we're trying, that I think SKIP solves, is that for each person who might be, let's say, PEP2 certified, there's probably 200 people who are glad to say that they are PEP2 certified, but without the official certification. And it turns out that they're just saying that, and it's like they're not really. So I kind of feel like the great thing about SKIP is we finally have a way. If a person is authentically an industrious person, SKIP is a piece of cake. It's easy peasy. And the number of people, here's the next question, and I'm going to do a call of hands for this. I'm going to guess that a bunch of people on this call have heard of people, like they've met people that are looking for somebody to inherit their homestead. And so I want to put the question out there. How many people have met somebody that they're looking for somebody to inherit their land? They're looking for somebody worthy to inherit their land. They're struggling with it. I mean, I'm sure you've all seen the video, and you know how I talk about Mike Ayler. And in the video, I'm talking about how Mike Ayler was looking for somebody. And in the end, he died before he found somebody. But he had more than 100 interns over the years, and none of them made the cut. But show of hands, who knows of somebody that they've met at some point in their life that would that is looking for somebody to will their land to, somebody worthy? 0 hands are going up. So I guess we just have the 3 people that they're like, I would be glad to find somebody worthy to will my land to, but they don't know of other people. I feel like before we started the Kickstarter, I feel like I heard from more than 24 people that were looking for somebody worthy. And after the Kickstarter started, I think we've probably heard from, I'm going to say 5 more people who are looking for somebody worthy.
Yeah, I think I've heard probably closer to 8 Otises, or people who are looking for land since the Kickstarter started. I can't raise my hand for some reason because I'm a co-host, but yeah, I got my hand up for the last couple as well. I know a few people personally that don't know they're Otises, but are, so I just have to convince them, give them the buck.
It does, and if nothing else, I mean, we've been looking up a bunch of statistics, and the number of farms that just like somebody dies and then the farm just goes to shit, and then the family, of course, they're like wanting to sell the farm or get money for it, but some of them are like, we want the farm to continue and not sell it. I wish we could find somebody worthy to keep the farm running, and we'll pay them. But then there's a lot of people, I think, I think I read one of the statistics is it's like slightly more than half of acreage, of plots of farms, just would go to the government. Like the person would die and there were no heirs. So it just goes to the government, who just sells it for whatever they can get for it. I mean, and then there was like another statistic that was about the number of acres per year that goes into disuse. It's nothing's being done with it. It just becomes a giant weed patch, and then the houses, the buildings just start to decompose and degrade. And it was kind of like the number of those was just profound. I think there was like New York State had some very exact numbers for that. And so, and the numbers were just absolutely massive.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, something like 300,000 acres a year over a 15-year period, something like that. And then there's also all the houses that are given to unworthy people or just sold after they're passed on, and then the orchards and gardens get turned into lawn, and the house is torn down, and you put up your little mansion. And or a subdivision shows up. So that isn't lost to the government or abandoned. It's just converted into urban sprawl.
Yeah. All right, continuing on with our article. The question is how to get permaculture apples into Safeway. I know my answer will sound batshit crazy to the person asking the question because it's a massive response that dodges the question. The largest part of my official answer is do the GERT thing. And if millions of people do the GERT thing, then maybe random permaculture apples will someday appear at Safeway. I can wish for an end to the Chem Ag subsidies that make Chem Ag apples so cheap on the market. And I can wish for an end to petroleum subsidies that make that fuel and fertilizer so cheap for shipping and petroleum-based ag. Maybe local permaculture apples will be cheaper than Chem Ag apples from China. But this is all just silly wishing. I would like all apple orchardists all over the world to learn about permaculture and then replace 90% of their apple trees with other fruit trees, nut trees, lots of different trees, shrubs, and other crops. They would then grow 50 different crops in the same space, and they would continue to grow apples. I like the idea that they feed themselves first, and then they sell apples for far more than they're currently getting. If hail hurts their apples or they don't get enough money for the apples, then it could just be a bumper crop year of pork. All right. I kind of feel like the thing about, I like the idea that they feed themselves first. I feel like there's a lot of stuff going on where people are growing crops, growing apples in a food desert. So it's like, oh yeah, there's lots of apples, but there's not other kinds of food. And so I kind of feel like that's another great reason for them to grow a garden or to grow other foods in between all the other foods. So I kind of, so the concept of a food desert in the middle of like in the middle of Washington State, I've been there. Do we have a show of hands of how many people have been out in the middle of Washington State where they grow all those apples and been driving past billions and billions of apple trees? So there's a hand waving. The thing is that it's like, yeah, there's hardly anything out there. Like you drive to between Wenatchee and Tonasket, and it's like, sure, in Wenatchee and Tonasket, there are restaurants and grocery stores and things like that. But in between, there's not much. And there'll be apple stands selling apples, but it's just apples, not much of anything else. Once in a while, you'll get to a food stand that'll have some other things. But boy, it does. It seems like quite the food desert. And my understanding is that in the Midwest, like in corn country, corn and soybean country, then it's just corn and soybeans and nothing else. All right.
My experience has been that the way that we have things set up today, most so-called farmers would starve to death on their own farms if they didn't have food coming in from the outside.
It's true. It's true. If you really want to see permaculture apples in Safeway, consumers have to ask for permaculture apples. And the first step for that is start telling all those people about the value of permaculture. I can think of dozens, maybe hundreds of answers, each catering to all the nutty follow-up questions that this same person might ask. But I'm going to focus on my favorite answer. My official answer is 65% the GERT thing. The remaining 35% is made up of a community of, say, 40 people. Some people bring money to the community and they buy meals from somebody that prepared the meals with the food that came from 6 or 7 producers one of whom was Gert. There is no Safeway in this answer. Gert doesn't even make epic cash from apples. Gert does make about $8,000 per year from 40 different crops and from other business arrangements she has with other people in her community. All of the stuff about the natural wax being stripped off the natural apples and replaced with petroleum wax is eliminated. There are no stickers on the apples. There are no sprays being used, no grafting or transplanting. There are no huge trucks going to the warehouse and from the warehouse to the distribution center, then to the grocery. People don't drive to the grocery store to get the apples. There are no deals where the orchardist pulls up to sell the apples and is informed that the price being paid for McIntosh apples has dropped 12% this year. If he doesn't like it, he can leave his apples to rot on the tree. The warehouse isn't trying to compete with apples from China, and nobody is asking for the government for more subsidies for assistance. The apples are not limited to a half dozen varieties that are best known for their very long shelf life. There's also no need to store the apples in a low oxygen environment to get them to last longer, which is a thing we haven't mentioned yet. My understanding is that like the McIntosh apple, I think what they do is they put it in a space that's like pure nitrogen, like, you know, gaseous nitrogen, not liquid nitrogen or anything like that. It's just they remove all of the oxygen. So any fungus or bacteria or anything in there that's thinking about eating an apple cannot survive in that environment. And so it dies. And so then the apple lasts longer. So there's this you know, bizarre low oxygen environment to get the apples to last long. In my favorite answer, there are millions of communities all over the world. Maybe we call them villages or something. Some have hundreds of people and some have just a dozen. And in each one, there's diversity of people. Some people are bonkers about producing food. Some people are bonkers about cooking. Some people are bonkers about building. The list goes on and on. And some people are just plain old retired, complete with savings and or residual income streams. They don't really need to leave their community. They have everything they need. Maybe they get some stuff from Amazon once in a while. Maybe they take a trip to town once a month. Maybe they go to the big city once a year. Some people might have gone 5 years without leaving the village. Gert and her community and permaculture. This is my answer to nearly all of the world's problems and nearly all of the questions I'm asked. There are about 20 people at my place today. A lot of food is being grown and planted. Humble homes are being built. And one person asked about getting permaculture apples to Safeway when I pointed to a tiny apple tree about 4 inches tall that was growing up from the end. There you go. That's my little essay that I wrote 4 years ago. Any questions or comments? Rude gestures? Anything? Alan?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I was just double checking to make certain on the level was being done that could be added to your list of things on the apples is that the permaculture apples are not irradiated with gamma radiation.
That's true.
To make them last longer.
That's true.
Yeah,
I mean,
which is being done.
That's a selling point. The gamma radiation is how we turn into the Hulk.
Ah.
And ladies and gentlemen, the female Bruce Banner. So,
yeah, they use gamma radiation to kill a lot of the microbial organisms on certain vegetables. And I was just double checking and making certain, yes, it is used on some apples. It's used on a lot of leafy greens and things like that these days. to try to kill things like salmonella and E. coli and so forth because of the problems with the supply chains on these large ag systems.
Do you know if any of that is being used on organic apples?
That would I have to do some research. I can't tell you that off the top of my head.
Okay, all right. I do. There's a beautiful video on YouTube. I seem to be the only person that finds it interesting. Every time I try to share it and point at it, everybody else seems bored. To me, it's so important. But it's this girl who's like, I don't know, maybe she's 9, and she's like, this is her I guess it would be like her science experiment or like science fair exhibit or something like that. But she's like, okay, here's me trying to grow. I got a sweet potato and I cut it in half and put the toothpicks in it and I put it in water and I'm going to grow a sweet potato. And it didn't do anything. And it's like, so somebody pointed out that the sweet potato is treated with stuff to keep it from sticking little roots out, because people don't like to buy sweet potatoes that have little roots sticking out of them. And it's this stuff called bud nip. And until I watched this little girl's video, I had never heard of bud nip. So anyway, it's got this bud nip, and on top of that, she said something like, I believe it's not even like sprayed on the outside. It's more like it's something systemic. Like somehow, I don't know, the plant must get to a certain point, and then it's like it's inside it. It's not just on the outside. You can't wash it off. It's inside the sweet potato. So then she decided to go to an organic grocery store, and she bought an organic sweet potato. And then she did it with that, and she did get some growth out of it, but it was pathetic. It was like, like, what? This is hardly doing anything. So then she found out that the organic stuff is also treated with bud nip, just not as much. And that the only way to get a sweet potato that is not treated with bud nip, she had to go to one of those, like, it wasn't exactly a Saturday market, but kind of like a public market, or like what's fresh from the farm kind of a thing, like Farm Direct or whatever. And then that stuff, and then she planted that. So she had all 3, and so she showed all 3 in their current state. The first one still had no growth on it. The second one had this little bitty growth on it, and the third one had this big jungle growing 4 feet tall out of it. And so to me, it's kind of like, in a way, this kind of is painting a picture of what we're talking about. I mean, if nothing else, the third one was grown in a garden, and no one ever had a chance to spray it with bud nip. And on top of that, I believe the little girl pointed out how the bud nip is toxic, and it does make people sick. I think it may even be carcinogenic. And yet, of course, it's acceptable to be used in organic food. All right. Anybody got anything to add? Nope. If you like this sort of thing, come on out to the forums at permies.com, where we talk about, not bud nip, where we talk about GERT, homesteading, and permaculture all the time.